All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody that's joining us, that's listening in on this one. We are back again with another one of the Wizer broadcasts, and we're actually gonna have some fun on this one. We're gonna have some good fun. There's a bunch of us who have done these ones before, and a bunch of new folks on this one. So we're going to be talking about security and development bedfellows. So a lot of you already heard about the DevOps, DevSecOps, and that side of the world, and my preference is obviously the DevSecOps side of the world, and we have some amazing folks here to have a good conversation. Now, there are four of us on camera, and we have Eliza is off camera because she is waving the Linux banner for us. And unfortunately, apparently Linux and GoToMeeting don't seem to get on at all. So that was an interesting discovery this week. I'm gonna let her talk about that for a minute. So without further ado, I'm gonna shut the hell up, and I'm going to let everybody else talk for a minute. Aubrey, if you would love to kick it off. Oh, you can. You got a mouthful of food. Hold that
No.
Oh, you're
I
good.
knew you picked me because I got chicken in my mouth, so like completely, that's fine. No, that's very gracious and very parliamentary of you.
You're up first.
So yeah, I'm Aubrey Stern. I'm an interim CTO. I have a wide spectrum of experience in development and operations, and like now incorporating more security stuff. So like very generalist across everything. So I'm not good at particularly anything at all. Probably more. I remember we used to talk about the T-shaped engineer. I would describe the people that I tend to grow and myself as more M-shaped, so multiple vertical depths, which makes sense because you can tell that story over a wider spectrum. So yeah, very AWS centric and cloud engineering centric, primarily a Node.js developer. Although I have been doing 8-bit Nintendo DMG01 development recently in Go. So actually, it's one of my favorite pastimes to work with, like the Game Boy code, because it's quite simple. And I've been doing that lately for fun and profit. Maybe there's no profit in it at all. Anyway, these folks are.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to be here and talk about security stuff with all of you in depth. I think you're all much better than me at this stuff, and I come as just a lonely wanderer.
Eliza, the disembodied voice.
Yeah. Hi, how are you doing? So I'm the CEO of that security company, and Pocket Seam, and the founder of Ladies of London Hacking Society. I do have a face. I did actually put some makeup on today because I thought, I hope this camera works. Yeah, but Go Ahead can go and F themselves. Sorry, not Go Ahead, that's someone else. Go to Assist can go and assist themselves. So yeah, I come at this primarily from a security perspective. I definitely see myself as a learner in this space. I'm not a developer by any stretch of the imagination. I just see some really disjointed activity happening in the DevSecOps space, and if it got the investment from people's attention that it really required, it could be fantastic. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on the matter.
Awesome, thank you. Mr. Miller, Mark, please, would you lead the gentleman away?
Well, first of all, thanks, Chris, for the invite. It's always good, especially with the group that's here. We don't get to see Aubrey and Eliza much because they're over in the UK, and it's nice to make the connection. And you and Jason and I are relatively close, so this is kind of nice. Background, I think you and I know each other from the RSA conference, where I brought the DevSecOps board and you grabbed those. I'm very sorely displeased that it's not hanging behind you in your man cave there, but we'll just leave it at that. I am the senior storyteller at Sonatype. A lot of people know Sonatype through the Nexus platform and the stuff that we do there for open source software security. Our current project right now is we're doing the adversary trading card set. And Chris, you've made those. I think most people here have made those. I was at the RSA conference when Robin Yemen was there from Lockheed Martin. She works on the F-15, and they had talked about how they are developing personas for their people to actually visualize who is trying to attack your system. And I thought that was very, very cool. So I kind of ran with it and said, why don't we just set up an adversary trading card set? And so we started to roll that out. It's had a really nice appeal to it. And the final thing would be, I am the co-founder of All Day DevOps, which I think all of you have spoken at one time or not. We're expecting over 40,000 people this year live online on November 12th.
Yes. I totally failed to submit again this year. I just, yeah, normal.
I expect nothing less from you, Chris.
It's about normal, I'm afraid. Jason, sir, please lead us away. And while you do, I'm going to go find something. I know exactly where it is. So please talk for a second.
You got it. So definitely to, Chris, appreciate the invite, as well as Wizer. As far as where I've been, where I am coming from in terms of how I got involved in this, Chris and I met through chance. I had some questions, and where my space is in this is I kind of dabble in all the areas. I know enough about security to be dangerous. I know what needs to be in place. I know how to tell my dev team what needs to be in place, but then I don't know how to bang the code out myself. And then from an operational standpoint, I'm the one that's sitting there going, okay, I understand that you met my needs, but guess what? It doesn't work in real life. And so, I'm the guy that throws the human element in there and makes sure that somebody actually breaks their stuff to help them understand that I don't care what your code looks like and how good it passed through your testing, it doesn't work. So I'm here to be that guy. And just something that I got from Chris recently, yeah, we're going to poke the bloody bear today. Absolutely.
Today's going to be one of those days where we got stickers and maps, and I knew exactly where that Monopoly board was, because it's actually away in one of the, I've got like a set of just cool stuff, and it's in there. I actually want to find somewhere to put it. I'll figure it out at some point. Mark, to your point, actually, so to Mark's point, and for everybody that's listening, the Monopoly board was one of those, like, okay, this is really, really cool. But with the trading cards, what's been interesting is actually Gerald's CISO over at LogMeIn. He and I have been talking behind the scenes about doing like an entire Dungeons and Dragons, like building out an entire map architecture for our world. And we were looking at maybe using the cards as part of that as well. So you can pick your palette. We can do all of that kind of stuff. That's actually kicked off some amazing discussions. And the same thing with running tabletop exercises. Did a couple of amazing tabletop exercises the other day when it was some amazing role playing. And we were talking about using the cards in the role playing. Again, just ways to get people to think differently about security. I mean, that's part of the reason I'm hanging out with Gabrielle and Dima and Anna and everybody out at Wizer, is it's just trying to get everybody to think about this whole damn thing a little differently, put it to the forefront, and then build in the ops and build in the development at the same time. All right, so with that said, let's start with the first question, which is really, what the heck is the DevSecOps side of the movement? Why are we doing it? What is it? Why is it important? What's good, what's bad, and what's ugly? But for me, really, the first one is the why. And I've got, Mark, I have to go to you for this one to begin with, because, you are literally, let's face it, one of the fathers of the movement.
Grandfathers. Maybe great-grandfather.
Grandfather.
There's a couple. There's a couple stories here, so I'm going to keep them as short as I can. I was first introduced to DevSecOps by Shannon Leeds, who I literally consider the godmother of DevSecOps. She runs the red team at Intuit and has been really at the forefront of this, or way before other people started participating in it. She actually introduced it to me. The second one is, if you know DevOps, you probably know John Willis. John and I have done podcasts, blogs, everything together. And one of the things that we first started talking about, John was opposed to DevSecOps, the word itself. John and James Wickett and a bunch of people that we all hang out with and know. And finally, after working with John for a while, he actually wrote an article called DevSecOps, it's just a name, get over it. And that was the thing that actually turned things around, because John started realizing that when he was using the terms DevOps and talking about DevOps to the C-level suite, he'd get glassy-eyed responses. I mean, there was nothing happening there. But when he put sec in there, when he started talking about DevSecOps and putting security in the mix, it really opened up the room. There was a much broader discussion, because now you've got risk assessment. Now you've got things you can actually put tangible results on. So that's the quick background on how I'm part of the DevSecOps movement and why.
No, that's appreciated. Aubrey, give me some thoughts on this one, on the logic behind DevSecOps, because I mean, you're coming at it obviously from the weeds upwards and from knowing and understanding really the developer side of things and how it's integrating into the security. So I really am interested in your thoughts on this one as well.
From doing a thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely an interesting space. I think when we had that shift like years and years ago, when folks that like sysop folks who used to be able to go, I'm a Cisco person, I do networking on kit, blah blah blah. There was like this 1-2 year period when like cloud started to blossom, and then suddenly like your Cisco skills were completely useless because you're working on like what AWS presented to you as an abstraction of the network, right? And you can't go down to the level that you could anymore. And what was network and what was like sysops people shifted straight into software, right? It's over there, happened like really quickly, and it became like a development thing. And I think, you know, when we look at like what does like security look like, those perimeters that we used to create don't exist. Like a really good book on thinking about like for cloud I found was the O'Reilly Zero Trust Network book. It's a good book to start thinking about like, okay, I'm in a shared environment, like I should trust nothing, like how should I start building this infrastructure? And so like, you know, when you start going, okay, I have queues, and so I can go and create this cluster in Fargate, and this will contain my external services, and everything else will go and live in another cluster that's completely isolated, has no internet access, and you can only get to it from a queue. And it's like, as a developer, like that's nobody else's responsibility, your responsibility. And so my engineers are those M-shaped folks that have to also go and build this infrastructure as well. And I don't create those silos of infrastructure and development because I don't think it works. Like genuinely, I don't think that if you can't think about how your application is going to be deployed into something, I don't think you can do that security on it. I don't think you can go and think about what those risk vectors look like when you're going to be attacked, like what the supply chain looks like. Because if you write the service and you go and write the pipelines for it, then you're going to have like Sneak enabled, and you're going to be checking those packages or Sonatype in there. Like you're going to control that security all the way through this stuff. And then when you go to AWS, like you're going to be thinking like, okay, I'm going to write the AWS config policies. So you can't do that thing. You can't go and create an unencrypted database. You can't go and like end. So you need to, like from my perspective, the folks that I tend to go and build are those folks that understand that whole part of the spectrum, because like we're not in the days when you could get away with like working in a silo and handing it over the fence. Conversely, when we were at Nationwide, I really enjoyed working towards what compliance looked like. Financial services was really interesting for me because I started to learn how to go faster in FS, and what it looked like was like the risk organization is a huge part of how to move faster. You have security and risk, and those are like your primary go faster stoppers. And once you have security and risk on board, you can go really fast. And so what we ended up trying to pioneer was a continuous compliance platform that basically said like, this is platform as code and how it exists today and how it exists every day as a snapshot of code. And then we created like a suite of tests that literally would deploy our platform and test that things should be true. So if you had something that said like, you know, thou shalt not port 21 through like Kate's, okay, like there should be a test to go and assert that somehow and prove that. Like if you're saying, hey, like second line, we continuously like assert that this thing that you've told us not to do in the organization is true, like then you can move a ton faster and start getting like material risk taker sign off. You can start to go and get that security sign off. And what's also interesting about that is you suddenly move away from those folks in the organization that provide like security as advice, and you turn it into a codified thing, which is really interesting, because then you're saying, if you're saying something should or shouldn't happen in this platform, you must write it as code to assert that it's true or false to be a thing. And that changes your landscape and security like immediately. That means you've got folks, that's such a huge fundamental shift to like some of those people that you engage with who like work in security, who can only give advice, who can't code, who can't actually practitioner. Like suddenly you're saying, you like pretty much like the sysops people moving into like the cloud space, like you must write code to be a practitioner of this. Super interesting.
Yeah, that's Eliza. I'd appreciate your thoughts on this one as well, because obviously always coming at it from the outside of it, you're coming at it from the security side. So I'd love some thoughts from you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so for me, from the security perspective, I think that we sort of need DevSecOps for really obvious reasons. We need to keep on trend when it comes to what's happening in the world. Someone just put a fantastic statement in the chat as well about if we don't embrace DevSecOps, our adversaries will. I think that's precisely it. We need secure code. That's the obvious one. We need secure code that works well for a corporate environment. I think there's a lot of challenges there. I think we're probably going to go into that at some point today. But what you were saying then, Aubrey, about previously about silos and whatnot, being in a silo and having a defined set of goals to enact every single day really does benefit people that aren't particularly ambitious, or maybe they're just happy in how it is now. And I think that's something that we have to overcome culturally, because a lot of us here today, you know, we've taken time out to do something, talk about something that we enjoy, to learn more. And there's a lot of people, there's more people, in fact, that aren't interested in doing that. And just because someone works in security or works as a developer or works in operations, it doesn't mean that they've automatically got that innate thirst for knowledge and improving processes and whatnot. So the way that it is currently, when it's in an organization that's not particularly doing DevSecOps right, is, you know, potentially a happy environment for some of those people in those silos, and that's, you know, going to be causing this friction around trying to implement that change. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm interested in, as well as like the security aspect of it. I'm interested in how we make people get on board with this.
No, that's fair. Jason, I mean, you come at it from obviously the operator standpoint, which is, again, you know, you bring that trifecta view of this as well. I'm interested on your thoughts, because obviously, you know, we've got the ops side of it, or not the ops, we've got the development side, the security side. You're kind of like, you've got all the tools to hand and you're implementing them, let's face it, on an ongoing daily basis. So thoughts from you on that one, on the logic as to what is it, and start running. I'm interested on the why do we need it part of it. We'll kind of hit some of that in the benefit stuff.
No, absolutely. So when you think about it, you know, Eliza said it perfectly, that, you know, we're so used to being in a siloed environment. Everybody wants to be the most important, and you can translate this into any other three-tiered, three-legged environment. Sales is the most common. Sales reps say, if it weren't for us, you wouldn't have any revenue. Marketing team says, if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't have any customers. Ops team says, if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't get paid, you wouldn't have resources. So everybody wants to be the most important. And I think to go to your second part of the implementation piece is we have to figure out how to break people out of the me aspect of it, and the team capability of there being a shared accountability. Because right now you see in most cases, the security side is ranked on very specifically, can you keep it from being broken and breached? The, you know, dev side is, you know, can you bang out the code to our spec and get it to work outside of a sandbox? Can you get it to work in production? And then, you know, both of those teams look at the ops people and go, don't break our stuff. Well, the problem is the ops team is the one that throws in that human element of user that says, yeah, guess what? If there's a flaw, we're going to find it. Now, hopefully we find it internally versus it coming from the outside as a breach, an attack, or something of that nature. So how do we get there to be a shared accountability and a shared common you know, goal of there is a reason that we are the three legs of the stool, and that the reason this stool is supporting the environment is because we are working together.
Yeah, actually, this is a really good question that came in kind of along that kind of leads to something I really want to hit, and we might as well hit it now while we're talking about it, which is, it was basically within an organization that's got little or no competition, leadership is convinced that innovation is not as important and plays down the value of, you know, DevOps, DevSecOps. Any suggestions on how to shift that mindset? And I think, again, to me, I mean, I came at this because of Mark, and because of basically going, you know, as coming at this from the security standpoint, I look at this and go, we've been kicking around security for 25, 30 years. and we failed. I mean, we have failed spectacularly. We spent last year $124 billion in our industry, and we lost more and more shit than we actually have in previous years. And so we can't fix this problem alone. There is snowball chance on hell on doing it. And I think we have to figure out how to get rid of that mindset. And when you start looking at, hey, let's get the development teams, the operation teams, and the security teams in the same room, in the same place, with the same common goals. Because let's face it, we're all getting paid by the same freaking company. How do we fix this together? That's my thoughts on that one. But I mean, Mark, I mean, you guys have built a community around collaboration on this one. So give me some thoughts on, you know, we look, how do we get people on board? How have you done this? How have you built this community up so much?
Yeah, for people that aren't aware, it's like Damon Edwards and I are running the DevSecOps, the DevOps LinkedIn group. We've got over 80,000 people. You know, the All Day DevOps has over 40,000 people registered for an online event, that kind of stuff. So the question is, what have we done differently than other people's to get that type of engagement, to get that type of traction? I think it has to do with opening up the lines of communications from peer to peer. And I don't think enough people do that realize that. Derek Weeks said this to me once, because I was thinking, look, Derek, I don't do anything that great. I mean, anybody could do what I do. And he said, no, Mark, it's like what you think is obvious is awesome to somebody else. And that really struck a chord and goes to the heart of your question is, if you are doing something that's working, it's part of your responsibility to tell everybody else, not just on your team or in your company, but to the community in general. Hey, we tried this thing. You know the book, Chris. You've been part of epic failures. We had a huge failure here, and we came back, and this is what we did. The story of failure and how you work through it is something that is critical to getting community engagement. I saw Jason, I saw you smile on that one. It's like all of us have had those failures, right?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have. I mean, that's I'll put my hand up on I put my hand up online on LinkedIn on a regular basis and go, look, learn from my bloody mistakes. And that's, I remember when I was over in the UK, I did the DevSecOps with Aubrey in the UK, and I remember sitting down just listening. I was listening to your talk, and I'm like, I'm learning so much. I'm learning from your lessons. I'm learning from what you did. I'm learning from how, and I'm learning the reasons why. So again, give me your thoughts on this one. How do you're coming at it? I mean, you've got the security side of it. Obviously, you've got an amazing amount of stuff on the development side of it. How are you bringing the people in from the security and the ops teams? And then give me some thoughts. Is it working? Are there barriers on that one? Give me some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had mixed success with this. Like, I mean, there are, I don't, it's very hard to like explain this one without generalizing, but like, there are those security folks that talk about generalist things, right? So you want to do deep packet inspection, right? And then it's like, well, then you violate end-to-end encryption. So like, right? So, yeah. And then you go and take like a cloud controls framework and they read that thing verbatim, and it's like, well, anyone who knows this will challenge that. And it's like, okay, so that's not the kind of person that like we want. We want those kind of people. We want the people that will think about like code first. So because I do so much with enterprise, I start to think about the life cycle of these things and like how can you take it to the next level. Like my big shift nationwide was to go and work on that platform of continuous compliance. Like we missed that bit. Like in the whole DevSecOps thing, testing and compliance is kind of like not there. Like we do security, but like what is persistent security? Like, and what is the value behind that persistent security, right? The value is that people inside the organization say, I will trust that you are saying that we are in compliance based on the things that we have deemed to be completely safe, and I will let you move faster than I normally would, right? And that's the value, that those people trust that you're saying that you're completely within, and that's where that whole thing around the cloud controls framework comes in. When you look at like the CSA, CC, like, you know, that's like a good bet. And you have a lot of these big four companies like selling their own version of that stuff for like $500,000, $1 million, like, and it's really just like a rip off of that stuff. And it's like, okay, great. So you've developed this framework, but like, what does it mean? Like, where's the meat in it, right? And the meat is the guardrails. So here are the guardrails that we have placed in place to stay in compliance with this framework. And here's all the security stuff, and right. And it's great. You think you tick those boxes, but how do you say every day that I have ticked those boxes? Like, we are still in compliance. And like, what are things we put in place to go and say like, we should rethink this thing because like maybe it's not relevant anymore. Or like, you know, there was an end date to that, or something that we did was relevant to Brexit, right? And there's a timestamp on that, and when we get past it, like that's no longer relevant and that can go away, right? Or this security thing gets patched and I don't have to worry about it anymore, so like we don't need that piece of code, or we don't need that protection. Like, how do you do the life cycle management of that stuff? Like, we're super not good at that. And I started to do a small, it was really like a weekend thought experiment with some people about, could we take a piece of code and could we do something like an abstract syntax tree over the top of that code and then start to go and pull out the comments? So could you build like a tagging formula to say that this piece of code or this block specifically relates to this control in the control framework and forms part of a guardrail? And then could you then work over all of the code base and roll that up into, because you have the tags over the same and says this tag is specifically to do with this guardrail, then create a body of evidence that then says this body of evidence directly relates to this control in the control framework. And here are all the things. And here are the time limits on when you should go and look at this because it may or may not be relevant anymore. That gives you not only continuous compliance, but it gives you like that continuous assertion that we are in compliance. You can start to get like super smart with this technology because then you can start to say, this piece of the organization is running this and you have the context, right? So you go, this is Terraform and here is this block and I have this rule in AWS config that says thou shalt not create unencrypted DynamoDB databases. The control is we might lose data. Like the risk is that, so control framework is always risk control guardrail, but the risk is that we might leak customer data and damage our reputation. The control is that all databases should be encrypted and that all data should be encrypted in transit. And so the guardrail would be, here is my module that by default encrypts all DynamoDB provisions by default. Here is the guardrail that says that thou shalt not provision any DynamoDBs that are unencrypted. And then you roll that up and you create that body of evidence that says we meet the control. And then can you imagine how cheap like a Big Four audit is when you have to go through that in financial services and you have, boom, my daily body of evidence asserted, everything,
there,
right?
Yeah.
Smart, right? So that's the evolution. It's like we're not there. And there's a solution, by the way, folks, if you want to go build it.
I love it. No, because that's got everybody. That has to have the dev, the security, and the ops all rolled into one. Otherwise, it's going to fail. Jason, you were laughing. You were smiling on that one. Give me some thoughts. You're just sitting there like, yes.
I've got so many thoughts from what Aubrey just said. So I'm gonna start off with contrasting two completely different environments. Sports stuff behind me, right? Okay, let's talk about sports. They operate in a world where low percentage is still considered exemplary. When you look at, a goalie's ability to block shots, if they're above a .9, if they're in the 90% or better range, they're doing very well. Anything below .9, all of a sudden you're talking about, oh, get this guy, down to the farm team, if not just bench him. So then let's talk about our tech environment. Let's talk about DevSecOps. Let's just talk about IT in general and networking. Everybody wants 3 nines, 5 nines, 7 nines. They want as close to perfection as we can get. But there's two aspects of that. One is a lot of what we do on the dev side is reactionary. We think we're being proactive. We think that we're anticipating and identifying what's going to take place. But in reality, we're staying as close to the event as we can in terms of the reaction aspect. So, Chris, when you said earlier that, all this money pumped into security and yet we're still losing, it's what becomes an acceptable loss ratio. And I think that's where, because there's a separation in mindset, and this came up in another conversation that you had, Chris, is ego. How do we remove the ego aspect of each pillar? To Eliza's point, removing it from the silo environment, getting it into a pillar or collaborative environment so that everybody realizes, you know what, there are three things. There's the absolutes, which is the compliance piece that Audrey said. So there's the must-haves, non-negotiables. There's the need to have, because this is what's going to make sure that we maintain function and capability. And then there's the nice to have. Wow, it'd be great if we could have a blue background, or, you know, I could have a Coliseum, you know, behind me, but GoToMeeting doesn't do that, right? So those are the things that we need to start thinking in terms of, is the absolutes for compliance, the must-haves for performance and engagement, and then the what should we do if we had the capability.
So this is where I can bring in my tasers. We can start talking about getting rid of those roadblocks.
Yes.
Always got to have the tasers. Always allowed to come to the party with tasers. Eliza, any thoughts on that one, on the logic behind like some of the benefits side of it? And then I'd like some thoughts from you, definitely, on like how do we get security? How do we get more security folks on board with this one?
Okay. Well, I think to start with, to answer this person's question that's in the chat, how do we get sort of upper management engaged in it? Unfortunately, it's quite a boring reaction. You've got to be able to speak in finance terms. So yeah. Again, like everyone has already touched on, talk about how and where they'll be compliant. Yep, yada yada yada. But if you can say that this will save X amount of time, that will save X amount of resources of X amount of engineers, that will result in this much money saved, which is so boring and so tedious. But if you want to ingrain DevSecOps into an environment, sometimes that's the route you've got to go down. And really, you don't have to spend a lot of money to enable DevSecOps in an environment. It's a cultural change. It's not specifically related to a specific set of tools. So definitely, if you relay the information in a way that they can sort of get their finance heads around and realize that it will actually save work, you know, they're more likely to want to engage with you on that. In terms of security professionals, it's a bit of a tricky one, because if you think about it, as someone in cybersecurity, I'm really interested in how applications work, and you know, a pen tester would be really interested in how an application works in order to break it, or a platform in order to break it or use it in a way it shouldn't be used. So you'd think that they would have this sort of innate desire to learn more about code, and vice versa. You'd just assume from the outside that a developer would really be interested in what a penetration tester is doing, but unfortunately, it's not always like that. I think that if we can find a way to relate what the person is doing in the job that they love, if we can relate the opposition to them, so for example, it's not really an opposition, but go with me on this. If we can say to a developer, look, we really want you to work with the dev team, really get your head around how they're working, and just, you know, give us any ways that you think that they could improve as they're working along, and introduce it in that kind of way. Again, sort of stroking the ego. I know that sounds terrible and we shouldn't have to stoop there, but unfortunately, in some environments, if we want this to work and we've got talented people, we need to sort of play to the talented people's strengths. Yeah. And then on the developer side, if you've got developers that have got an interest in improving and being more secure, if you can incentivize that somehow and put them, you know, in regular meetings and calls and social gatherings with the security team, you're gonna inadvertently create a cultural shift where they feel like they can go to each other. And I think that trying to force it is going to create resistance, whereas if you try and create an environment that everyone wants to be in and still feel like they've got control of their own role and it's not being stripped from them, I think that's a really good route to go down. But that's just me. I mean, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm just making it up.
That's appreciated, and and actually a chunk of that makes a ton of sense. I
yeah,
think. Oh, sorry, Mark.
If you don't mind, because this is like something that I've been working on for years, as far as how do you talk to people to make them understand what's going on here. A couple examples, like Eliza was talking about, if you can talk finances, like we've got a way, we can actually show a real case scenario where by using automated security, it saved 56,000 man hours in one company. Those are real dollars, 56,000 hours. We had another company that was doing a manual process for evaluating open source components as they were coming in to see if they were safe or not. And it was taking them 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, short would be considered 25 days to evaluate a component and approve it to go into development, when you can automate that and have it in less than 5 minutes. So those are the kinds of discussions that can be talked on a dollar level. Most people, though, are talking about risk assessment, and they're using that as we're trying to assign a dollar value to a specific risk. And that's when you can get the crosstalk going on, because is the risk a financial risk versus a development risk? I mean, there's all kinds of risks you're talking about. But when I wrote it down as she was talking, I was saying, what we've perceived as a risk, if it isn't perceived as a dollar value, and we could fix this thing, or we could not fix it based upon what is the risk assessment that it's going to cost us if we get caught. What we've seen historically is companies will ignore it if they think that the risk is going to be less than, the cost of the risk is less than fixing the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
I wouldn't mind dropping like a tiny bit of healthy challenge. Like I don't think it's financial. I think like it depends on the spectrum of organizations that you're talking to. So like if you take in the UK like a CMA9 bank, I can assure you like the security side of things, the money stuff, they don't give a fuck about. Like, because it doesn't cost, those fines, they're not big enough, right? If you miss a deadline for regulatory stuff being ready, like confirmation of pay, the fine's like nothing, right? And if you go, the data breach cost, it's nothing. Like how much was Equifax fine? Like 500,000, like $500,000? Like it's nothing, right? It's peanut money. Like what they care about, I think, is reputational damage. So all of those CMA9 banks will have their like enterprise command center, and those folks are monitoring like Twitter and social media and like everything all the time, every second of the day. And they have like things ready to go the moment the Mirror, the Sun, like any newspaper says that they were hacked, there's a data breach, there's like it's all ready to go. Like the thing that they care most about is that reputational damage. And it's like, I can tell you, like it's all over the control frameworks. Like that is the risk. It's the one that's called out. It's never money. It has always been financial risk. And I think it depends on, like, I guess the organizations that you work with. You're working with smaller orgs, maybe it is money, but certainly for like this bigger thing, like bigger companies and bigger organizations, like especially like the multinationals and conglomerates, like you're probably talking about, you know, I don't know, those people get fined and it's like nothing, right? It's a slap on the wrist. It's the reputational damage that.
We went through that. I mean, I remember there was the big hoo-ha. Was it earlier this year or late last year when Google got fined, whatever it was, like 2 billion or something ridiculous, and everybody was like up in arms, like, oh my gosh, they fined. And you do the math on it, that's like less than 1 day's worth of revenue. You're like, okay. I mean, at that point, it really seems to be the brand damage. But the difference is, I think, to Mark's point, and probably to Eliza's point as well, probably all of us, that's something we have to do with the organizations we work for, is what are those trigger points? I mean, we've all spent a long time doing social engineering skills, and OSINT is literally sitting down and going, we do it when we run tabletops. We had a talk the other week about tabletop exercises, but we do this when we run tabletops. It's like, what do you care about? Do you care about reputation risk? Is it purely a financial play? Is it something else? What is it that you give a damn about? And then you can go, okay, this is how a DevSecOps, you know, trifecta works to effectively help that. It works to do that. And to Eliza's point, getting those teams together doesn't cost a damn thing, or maybe it costs coffee and donuts or tea and biscuits or something. But that's the bloody cost. That's the net cost of doing it. All-day DevOps is freaking free, for crying out loud. I mean, that's what I love about this, is you're not bloody charging thousands of dollars to hear the stuff that you need to actually implement. The damn stuff is being given away with a packet of freaking biscuits. So this isn't something where we're withholding information. It's just like, okay, how do we get more information out? And then how can you tune it so that it fits into your environment? And I think that's the important part for me, is I think everybody's got to pay attention. And again, it means that development, sec, and ops have to come together and go, what is making this company tick? What does it care about?
Jason, I saw that you had a kind of a reaction to what we were talking about the financial stuff, huh?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, and you know, in one of my hats in my world, ROI is critical, but the tendency is to always drive towards the dollar amount. You know, whether it's people, you know, hours, whether it's financial, whether it's, you know, instead of, you know, putting money into a budget for security, what have you set aside in the event that you know, are put in ransomware? You know, a fun question I love popping out in some of my conversations is, so, you know, how much cryptocurrency do you have on standby right now? You know, do you have a couple 100,000 that's just sitting there waiting to be doled out because you don't want to be forward thinking and looking at what you're doing? And the drive of that particular conversation is getting the other side of the table to realize maybe my perception of what's important needs to shift. And I think that's where it is today. And you know, Aubrey hit it, Mark, you hit it, Chris, you hit it. Reputation and image. I'm telling you, the thing that most people care about in any segment of business is image. And that's why the dev team wants to be the most important. If the image is that they're the saviors, they're the ones that came in with the code and made it happen, you know, yeah, the security guys helped me out, but overall, it's, you know, breaking down the egos, finding the ROI, and making sure that that ROI is relevant from a, I hate to say it, but an emotional standpoint. What can you do that elicits an emotional response from the others involved, instead of just trying to put a number out there that they go, yeah, that number is not that big of a deal. 2 billion from Google, who cares? They don't.
Well, no, I mean, they definitely don't. Oh, so here's an interesting one with cryptocurrency. We have done such a bad job in this industry that there are companies out there now that when you get ransomware, you go to them and they will transact the cryptocurrency for you. Mm-hmm. It just amazes me. Actually, it doesn't. It frustrates me. I get the opportunistic thought, but we have screwed up so badly as an industry that we've built an entire industry around the fact that you will get your ass handed to you. Mm-hmm. I just want to go and bash my head against the wall half the time. I don't get it. I just don't get it. Anyway.
Well, I mean, Chris, think of them as the bail bondsmen.
I know, but that's fine. Yeah, I know. I'm
not saying it's right. No, I'm not saying it's right. But I mean, that when you think about how, again, the opportunistic aspect of it, you know, in general, businesses are capitalistic in what is the downfall. I heard too many conversations over the last, you know, 3.5, 4 months of, hey, what are you doing to respond to COVID? Stop. Yeah. What are you doing to take care of your business, your people? So I don't care what's going on around in the world. I know there's stuff going on. You know there's stuff going on. We don't have to talk about that. Let's talk about the real things that are tangible to solving the problem at hand.
Yeah.
And that's where DevSecOps comes in, and that we need to solve the problem at hand, which is they're separate from them, and they shall not talk to each other.
So let's have so there's a good question that came in from Alan, and I think this is where one of the questions I've put out to everybody, which is there a community to learn from? So Alan basically said, is there an accessible punch list that can help justify moving forward with strengthening, yada, yada, yada? To me, I think that is definitely something where we have a decent community. Everything from, you know, the all-day DevOps side of the world, you've got the DevSecOps side. I mean, there's so many areas where I think people can learn. Peer list, you know, the stuff that we're doing at Wizer, all of these things are there for people to learn from. Give me each one of your thoughts on this one, and I'm going to start with our disembodied voice first. Eliza, give me some thoughts on where do you go? I have to keep referring to you as that. It's awesome. I have this like this Casper ghost thought of you just kind of floating around in the ethereal void at the moment. So give me some thoughts on where you go for pulling in information. I just want to, you know, give me some thoughts.
Yep. So in London, there is something called DevSecOps London Gathering, and that's run by a guy called Michael Mann. There's always people that are complete and utter DevSecOps evangelists there. So they're always awesome to talk to, and face-to-face conversations over a beer around what is really working and what really isn't is really valuable. I don't underestimate that. But also, there's a couple of free resources online as well. So there's the DevOps Institute, and they have the DSOE training course. They have some free material on there if anyone's interested. And also the Linux Academy, which is just linuxacademy.com. There's DevSecOps Essentials if you want to go and just sort of test the waters if you've not sort of been in this space before or you need to improve. There's a beginner course there which is free with a 7-day free trial.
Nice, awesome. Mark, give me some thoughts from you, if you don't mind, please, on just focuses, things, places you go to. Which wells do you go to for information and thoughts, etc.?
I don't want to sound self-serving here, Chris, but one of the things that I have found extremely helpful, and Aubrey, you can laugh at that, but the Epic Failures books, the people that I talk to about epic failures actually change things. Those stories, I mean, we've got the 3rd volume coming out October 1st, Epic Failures Volume 3. But those stories seem to me like a way that the community can talk to each other to go, oh shit, it's not just me that hosed that thing. That's big for me. And to watch for that type of discussion on LinkedIn, I think LinkedIn is the place where I see a lot of things happening, and it gives me the ability to reach out. So my main thing that you're asking for me is I can generate community engagement for the projects that I find fascinating and useful for the community. I get it all from the LinkedIn people watching what they're talking about. That's how you and I met.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, yeah, I'm kind of with you on LinkedIn, definitely. I mean, I put a bunch of stuff out there these days. That's honestly where I put my hand up and go, hey, I screwed up, or here's some thoughts, here's some ideas, or whatever the muse has come up with that particular evening. Aubrey, give me some thoughts from your side, if you don't mind. Some resources and places you go.
The shittiest answer in the world, right? Like, so I'm not gonna like LinkedIn as well. I basically just read your feed and just like that's it. That's my primary source of information. Like, I have a bunch of other security folks. If anyone posts any documents like DoD or something like that, or like this is what we're doing, or you know, you go and read the COVID thing on like this is how we're doing the COVID app in the UK, and you're like, that's a part of shit. Like, you should know better. Like, those are really good learning materials for me. Also, some of these stories really like inspire that proactive, like, oh, how does that shit work? So like my interest in like the Z80 processor and stuff like that, like I can't do electronics. Like I can do little bits, but like I'm not good at that. I really want to learn, but like I'm not good. But I love watching those people who can do that stuff and do like the JTAG hacking on stuff that like shouldn't be touched, or the folks that will go and like desolder the BIOS chip and then go and like bin walk it and stuff. And so like I watched like those and then got really deep into it. And like watching George Holtz, who obviously like hacked the PlayStation and like that's really interesting. I was like, I can't do hardware, but I do understand like the value of understanding that stuff, and it's a big rabbit hole for me. Like the moment you start watching those and you go, oh, that casino, they got hacked because they plugged the fish tank into the Wi-Fi and then they jump from there to there, and it's like, oh, that was really smart. And like all those little things make you think, and then like when you're obviously doing your thing, you start thinking about all that shit yourself, and you're like how secure am I? And again, like that Zero Trust book from O'Reilly is a really cool one to think about, because there's like we don't operate in the cloud, I don't think, like by going like this is a zero trust environment, like I shouldn't trust even AWS. Like no, like who thinks like that? Because how can you, right? It's a shared environment. You have to assume that the thing the book says is like you assume that basically the government will get access to your shit because they have infinite money and infinite capacity to use that money and infinite resource, right? So they will eventually get there. So you just assume that the government will win. But for everybody else, like you make it super hard. I think one of the really interesting things to look into, and we'll see more of this, is a technology called SGX, Intel Secure Guard Extensions, and it's on the isolate processors. There are like flaws in this, and I think they can blow the EFUs and disable those instructions, but essentially it creates that secure enclave in the processor. Microsoft released a really good paper about potentially creating a secure enclave database, and that's really smart. And then so when I've been working on this, like what do you call it, like the side hustle, one of the things about it was like AI and processing data with AI, and I was like, well, how can I process this AI and have an organization not be super like worried about this kind of stuff that's in this text that I'm processing? And you can either do it like one of two ways. You do it at edge on either Core ML or a TensorFlow mobile model, and you do it on the device itself. And the Kirin 990 has a really nice NPU that's actually quite fast compared to anything else on Qualcomm. Or you send it encrypted to something like SGX and run it in that enclave, and then do the anonymization there, and then ship it out, and then kind of you never saw it, and it's their programming keys running in that enclave. So it's like all of this shit I know because I fell into some rabbit hole and tried to do it. And then you have the Google Acilio, which is like the thing that they created that's in C++ that allows you to create a container that does SGX. So some really interesting stuff. But like YouTube is my big rabbit hole for shit. Usually I end up watching like nuclear videos and stuff like that, and all sorts of like things that I probably shouldn't be watching about Chernobyl. And like I have to like honestly like the history of my YouTube is just horrifying. But I can fall into rabbit holes with George Holtz and watch like I remember him trying to cure COVID like a month ago or something. That was quite a funny stream.
God, yeah, totally. Nice. Jason, some thoughts from you on resources and places you go and you send folks to go look for things.
A lot of it is community. The things that I've seen on LinkedIn, to just kind of continue that as being a kind of a centralized hub. It really is building, and what I mean by that is we've all kind of been there for a while, but more of the barriers are breaking down in terms of who's willing to talk to who's willing to share experience. Chris, I'll say that you've been kind of that tip of the spear in terms of the, hey, I'm a person, there's failure involved, but this is how I learn and this is how I move forward. And by the way, if I screw up, I hope you can learn from it. And that's been something that I've done in my professional life, in my personal life, and in my military life. It's if I fail at something, it's because I tried. And so how do I adjust accordingly so that I can succeed the next time? And then how do I translate that to somebody else so that they don't have to go through the same thing? And for those of us that have kids, guess what? We see it painfully every day. You don't want them to make the mistakes that you did. And guess what? That's our community as well. Our community is going to make the same mistakes unless we start talking to each other, unless we start bringing this together.
Yeah, no, that is one of those things, definitely.
It's recognizing what is available through others in terms of their willingness to come to the table and have the conversation. So it really is about, to Mark's point, building that sense of community.
I'd like to extend that a little bit in that we're all talking about LinkedIn could be the core that most of us jump in for the first part of the day, right? The community in LinkedIn isn't in the groups. It's not in the things that LinkedIn has created for community. It's within the comments. Communities are building within the comment structure of LinkedIn. Chris, you get it, right?
Totally. Yeah, totally.
The idea that, I've got 80,000 people in a LinkedIn group, that doesn't really excite me that much. I mean, it's nice, but what I do have is conversations going on in disparate places through the comments, and that's how I meet new people. It's like if somebody says something in response to something that I put up, I immediately will engage with them to see if they can carry through on that discussion, and then I've got a new member of my community there. Don't overlook the comments.
The comments are a tough one because I mean, I'll get up in the morning. I'll typically put post late in the evening. Sometimes I've actually got a post I'm going to be dropping out this afternoon. But I mean, I'll post, and then you're ending up very quickly with a couple of hundred comments. And I do my level best most of the time to try to respond to all those comments. I mean, half of my time on LinkedIn is responding to comments and trying to do things. Sometimes it's a simple thank you, but other times it's much more engaging. And I think that's to your point, that's the bigger part, is the engagement. It's a two-way thing. I don't just want to throw something out and go have at it. I want to engage in conversation because for me, I get to learn as well. And I think that's the big thing with all of us is it's not just coming to the table with here's the information I want to impart, or here's everything else. It's like, look, what can I learn? And this is what I love about it. I sit down, I listen to Aubrey, I listen to Jason, Mark, Eliza. I get to absorb all of this information, and then we get to share it.
Aubrey, you get 5 comments, mate. Speak for yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll start commenting more. It's more fun. No, I think the engagement is the big part of this one, and it's, this is what it comes back down to. And I just realized we're getting close to the top of the hour on this one. To me, it's all about how do we do this? How can we do this? This is never going to always be about like one or each of us, to everybody's points on here. This is how can we bring something to the table? So I do recognize we're getting close to the top of the hour, and I want to let everybody, Aubrey, I want you to go and finish your amazing chicken. I'm going to go and have some bloody breakfast.
God.
How is it going? Is it good?
I've still got it. Like, my cat's been eyeing it up, like ate all the other little things, but my cat's properly eyeing it up now, and I'm like, no, I'm still gonna eat that shit. Don't do it.
I'm flipping breakfast in a minute. All right, so I would love some closing thoughts and remarks. We hit some of the questions. Some closing thoughts and remarks from everybody, and I'm actually going to go in reverse on this one. So, Jason, if you wouldn't mind, just closing thoughts and remarks, please.
Definitely enjoy seeing more connection and more outreach. It's good to see people being more willing to engage in the conversation and not be so staunch on this is how it's been, this is the way it's always going to be, because, well, it works. Sorry, it doesn't work, and now we're starting to realize that we're in a shared boat, and if we don't plug that hole in the middle of it, we're all going down.
That's fair. Mark, some final thoughts, if you don't mind, please, sir.
If you would make me the organizer or something, Chris, I can't share my screen as I'm doing the final tie-up here. So, Aubrey, why don't you go ahead and do that while we're switching over?
Boo. Like, I've been gobshotting the whole time we've been talking, so I probably don't have a lot to say now because my airbag is empty, but just be better. Like, I challenge myself to be better in what I do, and to keep learning and to keep pushing that stuff and to keep thinking about like how someone could exploit something and like what I would do to stop it, like if it happened. And we do that with pretty much everything that we build. Just keep pushing yourself to be better. And I think, if you do that with yourself, like other folks sort of like naturally around you, like raise their game and raise their bar. And we've seen that in some of the teams that we've worked in, that, I'm a big advocate of like test in production, like taking away the safety nets of like having an environment. I think that's a stupid fucking idea. Like, just do it straight to fucking production, right? Because you'll think long and pissing hard about pushing anything. Like, you'll think for a like if you know it goes horribly wrong.
I actually, there's definitely some, it's a fun one.
Honestly, like you take away the safety net of like there's an environment to say, you will think so much harder. Like if you're worrying, you haven't run enough tests. Like, dead simple, right? Like, and if we always say push the master. Like, if you feel confident, push the master. Like, be bold, right? Because like that's kind of how bold you should be if you're pushing to production. And like, we've talked an awful lot like product engineers and about this big shift in like how you operate a test and production environment. And it's because you understand your customer, which means you understand what happens when you break that service, which means you understand what happens when you get exploited in that service. And so there's a monetary cost that you can apply to that. And then you can go and say, like, I will de-risk it by doing X. I'm going to wrap it in launch darkly, and I'm going to 10% it. And like, so my blow up, is going to be, I could lose £5,000 in the next 10 minutes, right? But it raises your game so much, because like people are going to hold you to account to push that stuff, like no matter what you do. But if you do it in an environment, there's so many safety nets, there's so many other people to blame. Like, your game just naturally lowers. But if you run those kind of environments, like, I promise you, people around you will raise their game to your level. And like, there is risk, and I can vouch for this one, like, of mental human burnout of like running this kind of environment. And I think, there is a point when you reach that, like, we're all operating at a super high level, and like, I trust people around me that they're going to do the same thing that I would do. And that's a super nice place to reach. But like, while you're on that journey, there's definitely like some human cost to taking that path. There's awesome. My waffle bag done. Yeah.
No, I like that one. Mark, can you, I gave you presenter, you got it?
Yeah, I had promised people that I would show quickly the deck. Can you guys see the
Sweet. Yeah,
deck?
we got you.
Okay, good. So just quickly, I just wanted to show a couple. That the idea here is that one of the things that we can do is
That doesn't look like me.
we can create fun tools that people can use. So what I'm encouraging people to do is to actually participate in this. This is a fun thing that you can do, and actually go and create your own profile cards like this, your own adversary cards. Some people are asking for me to do defender cards. I'm going to concentrate on one thing at a time because it takes a while to get these done. But hopefully we can encourage everybody. I'm going to fly through this so I can get to the final one there. It's got the.
I'm worried about how far Mark goes at this point. Like, what's after these pictures?
So if you just, we'd like you to create an adversary card is what we want to do, so that we can use it. Chris is going to use it for gaming. I've got a couple other people that have found ways that they actually want to do some kind of Dungeons and Dragons stuff with that. I have no problem with sharing these things, and hope that we can use these kind of tools just to have fun and learn some stuff.
Yeah, I think that's what it's all about. So Eliza, if you wouldn't mind some closing thoughts, please.
Yeah, don't be afraid to get stuck in. Always be a lifelong learner, and even if you feel like you are at the top of the gate of your game in your area, you're probably not, and you probably could expand that area. And that's kind of the premise of DevSecOps. Try and get involved with as much of that cycle as possible. Not saying you have to be an expert in all of these areas, but you have to have an awareness and be able to work with other teams, and it's literally as easy as that, or it's crap and doesn't work.
Yeah, no, that's appreciated. Thank you. So I think, we've hit the top of the hour. In fact, we've hit the top and change, but it is what it is. Appreciated. Thank you a ton for everybody being on. Eliza, Aubrey, Mark, Jason, thank you very, very much. Gabrielle and everybody at the Wizer team, thank you very, very much for hosting this again. And everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you very much. And I'll see everybody online probably at All Day DevOps or All Day DevSecOps, or everywhere online. So again, thank you very, very much, everybody. Please take care and have a good one. Thanks.
Awesome. Bye.